this will begin to make things right.
Well, that now famous line and perceived snarky dig at the prequels sure didn't age too well or play out for Star Wars now, did it? But could it be what's to come for the MCU with Deadpool and Wolverine? Unfortunately, I think the MCU as we knew it is way beyond saving, but I do think maybe a stripped down version of it could still be salvaged. Something in between the former MCU, but also not quite as sparse as the occasional Spider-Man and X-Men films used to be. If, and that's a big if, Disney is willing to make some key changes. But are they willing to, or even capable of doing that? I feel confident that Deadpool and Wolverine will be a success. But Disney seems lately to take the wrong lessons from their rare successes. The real question is, how much has Disney learned from their failures? I mean, this is the same company who prides itself on finding writers who know nothing about the comics, some that even brag about it, while the company itself promotes ignorance of the source material.
I have to be honest, I was not very steeped in the comics.
I didn't read any comics or do any research.
I wasn't familiar with comics. I wasn't familiar with the movies.
We didn't lean into a whole lot of the history of the comic books.
Yeah, candidly, we were not enormous comic fans.
I wasn't super into superhero comics when I was a kid. I read a lot of like indie press stuff.
First thing I was told is don't read the comics.
You hire Jessica Gao to do She-Hulk, and then she laughingly admits on camera to knowing nothing about making a superhero show or a courtroom drama. And then Disney is surprised when that show fails? I mean, are you kidding me? What kind of way is this to run an IP? The golden age of the superhero film is over. There's no doubting that. No more D-list and Z-list characters getting films and shows with bloated budgets. I've said it before, Guardians was the best and worst thing to ever happen to the MCU. The Guardians films were great because you had someone like James Gunn in charge. He's talented, he knows the comics, and most importantly, he cares about the characters. How often could you say that about the MCU during the disasters that were phases 4 and 5? The only thing the idiots at Disney learned, in big quotation marks, was assuming they could use any unknown character and they'd work. The fans would show up, hand over their money, and ask for more. Unfortunately, we all know how that worked out. Not well. If Disney wants the MCU to survive, it's time to do what Deadpool and Wolverine is doing. Get back to basics. The biggest names, the best characters, in projects helmed by competent creatives that care about the characters and the source material, and most importantly, care about the fans. Deadpool 3 will be successful. How successful remains to be seen, but all the success in the world for Deadpool will mean nothing for the greater MCU if there aren't major changes. And we aren't talking just any old changes. This isn't like an NFL team that needs to get a new offensive coordinator and sign some free agents. This is more like a team that needs a new owner, new general manager, new scouting director, new coach, new coordinators, and a new franchise quarterback. Kevin Feige gets a lot of credit for the MCU, and as the years have gone by, it seems some of that credit was misplaced. Remember, it was Kevin Feige who stated on camera that the MCU would soon have more female heroes than male. Not that there's anything wrong with female heroes, but it was painfully obvious this random desire for there to be more female characters than male had nothing to do with story and everything to do with virtue signaling and answering the question of why Marvel didn't have a Wonder Woman level success for a female character. Another example of Disney's social messaging agenda invading their stories and superseding the actual story. The facts remain. The majority of Marvel fans are male, and the vast majority of their most popular superheroes among men and women are male. Making that change was going against everything the market and the sales numbers had told you. Barbie wasn't a success because it went after a male audience. It catered to its core audience, women and gay men. That's called smart business. This doesn't mean that female heroes can't succeed. Some already have in the MCU to a great degree, and many have in the comics. But when you take less popular characters and give them to creatives that don't know or understand the characters, you've set them up for failure, She-Hulk being a key example. She-Hulk could have been the best show in the MCU if done right, by the right people, and used the right source material, like say the John Byrne run. You could have had Boston Legal. Instead, we got some wandering dumpster fire with no real story and zero reason to care about the characters. Let's face it, the majority of the people that have been running phases 4 and 5 would mess up Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Captain America if you let them try. What hope do lesser-known characters in the hands of incompetent creatives have with general audiences? Disney got what they wanted, and it failed. Big time. Phases 4 and 5 were complete shit shows. The stories took a backseat to virtue signaling, and it showed up at the box office and in legitimate, non-bought and paid for reviews. The shill media tried their best to prop the MCU up that whole time, but even they saw the writing on the wall and have started turning on their masters. Even if Deadpool makes over $1 billion, that doesn't change the fact that Ironheart and Agatha are expected to be more of the same, underwhelming Disney Plus failures, with minor characters that are only here because they fit Disney's narrative and agenda. It would be one thing to follow up Deadpool with like a really good X-Men or Fantastic Four film, or to nail both Secret Wars films, but we aren't getting an MCU film for another year after Deadpool, and that will be Captain America 4. A film whose first incarnation was so bad that Disney decided internally to scrap it and start over. That doesn't exactly instill much confidence in me. As Disney stands now, I don't trust them with the X-Men, Fantastic Four, or Secret Wars. And even if all of those are amazing, it's likely to be too little, too late, and that is a huge if to begin with as far as being amazing. Just look at Fantastic Four. While I find the casting of Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards an odd choice, I thought overall the casting was pretty good, and most fans seem to agree. But then Disney had to be Disney, and as of now, has decided to skip Norrin Radd as the Silver Surfer for Shala Bal, a female version of the Silver Surfer who was only in a few issues of the comics and not even in the proper Marvel 616 timeline. It's just more of the same from Disney, and this isn't just any old gender swap. This is bypassing one of the most popular characters in the history of Marvel, and depending on when you asked him, Stan Lee's favorite character. If they were smart, they'll find a way to include Norrin Radd. I would use him as a Silver Surfer, and if they're hell-bent on a female Herald, let Julia Garner play a female Nova. But I have no reason to believe Disney will. Not when you have a bunch of people on the executive and upper production levels that know nothing about the comics, hiring people that know nothing about the comics to make comic book films and shows. It's the blind leading the blind. When you say it out loud, it sounds insane. A bunch of people that know nothing about comic books, priding themselves on hiring people that know nothing about comic books to make comic book movies and shows, but are then stunned when the projects fail. It's like hiring a fashion designer to do the plumbing in your new home, and then wondering why the water doesn't work and the toilets don't flush. Even if the MCU has a string of hits, it has a longer string of misses to overcome, and Captain America 4 is already on shaky ground and is also a year away. I love Anthony Mackie, but is he enough to carry a film? He's not exactly a Hollywood A-lister. You have Harrison Ford as President Ross in The Red Hulk, but how much did Ford's star power help the disaster that was Indy 5? There's also no Winter Soldier in Cap 4, so we lose a popular character along with the banter and team-up of Bucky and Sam, which I thought was the best part of Falcon Winter Soldier. In its place, we get Joaquin Torres as Falcon, Disney being Disney yet again, and bringing in another character from the comics that wasn't popular and that the general audience doesn't know. Add on top of all that, the failure of Kang as the overarching villain in the MCU on screen and off with the real-world problems of Jonathan Majors, and you have an uphill battle for the MCU that looks more like Mount Everest. Deadpool 3 itself looks on brand for Deadpool. There have been legitimate worries that it would be Disneyfied, but I think it looks like Ryan Reynolds has enough control to negate that for the most part. The fact that Ryan and Hugh Jackman care so much about both their characters and truly get those characters gives me little to worry about with Deadpool itself. But how much can one good movie starring characters from the Fox universe change things for the greater MCU? Will there be real ramifications for the MCU in this film? I hope so. This is an opportunity to begin to make things right, to cull the herd and to remember what made the MCU great in the first place. Faithful focus on story and character. But will Disney do that? Guardians 3 was for all intents and purposes a good, successful film, but even it had a weak opening weekend and relied on word of mouth because of the ill will the prior films had brought. It was well received critically and by audiences, as well as being a financial success, but then all the goodwill that it bought was immediately burned to the ground by the dumpster fire that was the Marvels. The same thing is going to happen when the next two things audience get after Deadpool are Ironheart and Agatha. It doesn't matter that they were already done and delayed. It will just seem to the majority of the general audience that things haven't changed. It's just more of, and I know I'm beating a dead horse, Disney being Disney. And even if you scrap both of those projects, there is still a year before Cap 4 hits. Plenty of time for the goodwill from Deadpool and Wolverine to disappear into the ether. Superhero films themselves aren't the problem. Disney is. As long as Disney continues to put agenda ahead of story and the fans, Deadpool and all the Wolverines in the multiverse won't save the MCU. I have a feeling Deadpool and Wolverine will be the same as Picard Season 3. I loved Picard Season 3, even though I couldn't be bothered to finish Seasons 1 and 2 because they were so bad. Picard Season 3 was the send-off the Next Generation crew deserved but never got, given to us by a creative like Terry Matalas, who cared about the characters and the story. But did it save Star Trek? No, it didn't. We still got the continuing disaster that is Kurtzman Trek. Picard Season 3 didn't make Star Trek Discovery suck any less. Disney chose this path for itself. They have no one to blame but themselves for ruining what was one of the greatest achievements in cinema. The current MCU doesn't even feel like the same universe that films like the first Guardians, Civil War, and Endgame exist in. And while Deadpool and Wolverine will undoubtedly succeed, it won't be enough to save the MCU. only Disney can salvage some of what's left of the MCU, and despite having Fantastic Four, X-Men, and Secret Wars to try and do that, I see no reason to believe they will. I'm going to enjoy Deadpool and Wolverine for what it is, an entertaining team-up of two great characters with two actors that care greatly about those characters, and we'll all be reminded of what could have been if Disney cared as much about the MCU as we the fans do.